All right. I still need to also go over to the World Museum of Mining, because I think they have photographs over there I haven't seen yet, so.
I'll let you know in a month.
Yeah, if you could. The National Register nomination actually includes a little bit more than just Harding Way. Technically, Harding Way begins at Harrison Avenue, essentially, and then goes all the way up to the Pipestone Pass. I've included everything from Pipestone Pass to the Cactus Junction, where Highway 41 connects with it. They were all built essentially at the same time in the 1930s, and I think it was just a natural beginning and ending place for the highway as well. And there are a lot of good engineering features on the Jefferson County side of the road as well, but the best stuff is on this side of the county line. Segment is this is what I'm looking at. You have to pardon me, I'm not technologically savvy. So this took me probably about 15 minutes to figure this out, how to do this. But it's a 14.5-mile segment. It begins at Cactus Junction and it ends at 9 Mile, where Centennial Drive connects with Harding Way. I thought that was a pretty good beginning and ending point again. The nomination just includes things within the highway right-of-way. Otherwise, I have to go get everybody's permission to list them. I didn't want to do that, but there's plenty of stuff to talk to about it within the right-of-way. There's also stuff on Forest Service land that I did include, and I'll talk about that here in just a minute, because you can't talk about Harding Way without not including the billboards on top of the pass. You all know about those.
Well, they will when we're done, right?
You will when we're done. So, for instance, there is a old highway section house on the Jefferson side of the thing. I didn't include that. It's not much of the old site left other than a barn. And the owner was really unhappy that I took a picture of it from the highway anyway. So I decided, I elected not to include that, although it should have been in there. And there are some bypass segments too. So this is the beginning of the highway. Just to start off, I don't have any photos, of course not. The highway does not appear on Walter de Lacy's territorial map of Montana that was done in 1865. So we know its precursor had to come from after that. It appears the origin of the road is associated with the establishment of a gold mine up on top of the pass called Pipestone. How it got, you all know the story, how it got its name, I'm sure. Pipestone, I hope you do.
That's why we're here, John.
Can I be honest with you? I don't really know the story. I was hoping I was gonna not go into that.
So that was a cover then.
Yeah, I figured somebody here would know. But then I can add that into the mining camp really never amounted to very much, but it was enough where they built a road from the Jefferson County side over to Butte, over the pass, about 1866 or 1867. It appears that a man named Nels Parson is the one that surveyed and built the initial road over the pass. Some of you may know Nels Parson from Parsons Bridge over by south of Whitehall. There's a very famous photograph of an old wooden truss bridge called Parsons Bridge. And Parson was really a big road builder, not so much because he felt good about Montana and its future, but because there was money in it for him. And that was the case with the original road over Pipestone Pass. It was intended as a toll road, but it doesn't appear to have ever been chartered either by Deer Lodge County, which this was a part of then, or by the territorial legislatures. So what happened with that, I haven't been able to find in the newspapers or in the territorial records. But its origins was originally as a toll road. In September 1866, the Montana Post reported about a wagon road extending from Pipestone to the Jefferson River Valley. It was described, quote, as a road such as none by the pioneer this doesn't really make much sense, but it's a direct quote. Such as none by the pioneer and prospector ever would attempt to take a vehicle over. So it wasn't ever a very good road, of course. So then we kind of lose the history of it. We know it was there, but I was really unable to find a whole lot of information about it until the early part of the 20th century. And things changed dramatically for road building in Montana then, and you all know why. Because of the dawn of the automobile age. That there was a big push throughout the United States, including Montana, to build better roads for people to drive their cars on. It's called the Good Roads Movement. And it wasn't backed by the federal government, it was all a grassroots thing. Montana had several Good Roads Movement groups that were active here, including a man by the name of, let me get his, Andrew J. Davis, which you may have heard of. He was a banker here. He was a pretty wealthy man. He was also pretty well known. He was also very civic minded. That in 1911, he decided that he was going to build a road over the Pipestone Pass. He didn't get very far, only maybe 8 or 9 miles. But the people here in Butte just feeded him. They threw a big party at the Silver Bow Club, gave him a silver loving cup, christened him essentially the father of automobile roads in Silver Bow County. Spent $20,000 of his own money to have the road built, which was quite a bit of money in 1911, as you can imagine. Also elected him president of the Butte Automobile Club. So he was, so that was really the genesis of the road that's there now, is because of Davis. By 1915, the road that he had pioneered was part of the Yellowstone Trail. Have any of you ever heard about the Yellowstone Trail? A few of you. The Yellowstone Trail is kind of an interesting subject in and of itself. During the early part of the 20th century, there was a lot of groups active that wanted to promote road building around the country. And some of you may have heard of the Lincoln Highway as being a road, one of those roads. Yellowstone Trail was an attempt by a group of South Dakota businessmen about 1912 to build a road or designate a road from Minneapolis, St. Paul to Yellowstone National Park, hence the name Yellowstone Trail. Eventually in 1914, that trail was extended out to the west coast to Puget Sound, and eventually it would be extended eastward to Plymouth Rock. So essentially what Yellowstone Trail was the United States' first interstate transcontinental highway. But the fun thing about this trail was there was no government involvement in it at all. All it was a series of county roads that were linked together. And the Yellowstone Trail Association promoted people in these different areas that the road passed through to go out and make improvements to it. And so there was Yellowstone Trail Days where citizens like us would go out and be expected to build a road, improve a road. I don't think people would do that today. But people believed in that so much that they were actually fairly successful for a large number of years. Getting roads constructed across the country, including Montana. They published road guides to give you an idea of what the road was like in certain areas, and those road guides also had advertisements for businesses along the way. So, and of course those businesses would subscribe to that and support the Yellowstone Trail Association. So the Yellowstone Trail here in Montana pretty much followed US Highway 10, what would later be called US Highway 10, or today Interstate 90 and Interstate 94. So it's very successful. If you go over to Deer Lodge, we just built a new bridge over the Clark Fork over there. And on the west side of the river there, just south of the old prison, there's a brick warehouse, and there are Yellowstone Trail blaze marks that are still on that warehouse. After 100 years, they're still there. So it's really, the Yellowstone Trail was really pretty important. It hasn't been a real good history of it written yet. I'm hoping to get that before I retire, just in time for when I retire, so I can't enjoy it as much. But That's what the road over Pipestone Pass was known as, the Yellowstone Trail. It was also known as the most dangerous segment of the trail in the United States. A dubious honor, as you can imagine. One person wrote about it, he says, the road has a feeling akin to sliding off the roof of a high-peak building. He says, so steep that the cars at the time could not stop or change gears. Drivers depended on their brakes and prayed that they would hold. So again, it was a bad road, essentially. And you know, as you can imagine, the Yellowstone Trail Association wasn't, I'm just showing you some photos of what the road, you guys all know what the road looks like today. There's the section house. The guy came charging out right after I took this picture. And fortunately, I was too stupid to run away. But he was nice about it. But you know, the road's got some really neat features to it. A lot of it deals with the rock work that the road was built through that's still there. None of which meets current highway standards. In 1921, the Highway Commission announced plans to improve what they called 18-Mile Hill. An 18-mile hill was, you know, from Silver Bow 18 miles to the top of the pass. And that's how that got its name. And that's how it's referred to in a lot of the early literature about Pipestone Pass Road, or Harding Way, is 18-Mile Hill. There was a little old stage station at the top of the pass called Grace, I believe, was what its name was. There was also another one that was on the east side of the pass as well. I don't recall the name of it offhand. The pass was also pretty well traveled because the Milwaukee Road Railroad built over it in about 1908, 1909. And so the road today pretty much, well, as you know, the road parallels the old railroad grade. So, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. 1921, again, the Highway Commission, which was just 6 years old at that time, 9 years old, excuse me, at that time, had programmed a project to improve that segment of the road, because as we all know, Butte's an important place, and having a road connection to the east was important. We did pretty good on the west side, but it wasn't really good on the east side. According to the road laws at that time, that the federal government would pay for half the road costs, and then the county had to pay the other half. So that proved to be a real hamper to road development in Montana up until the or later on in the 1920s. But the Highway Commission would actually design the highway. It would oversee the bidding process for when the project was awarded, and we had a resident engineer on every project to make sure it was built according to the plans. And so in 1921 that was programmed, and but it also kind of happened fortuitously because there was a strike going on the Butte Hill, so there was plenty of guys available for labor on this particular project. So there was 100 positions open to work on it. 1,000 men applied for it. So according to the newspaper. And of course, the people who had experience with explosives got preference in the hiring process, because there was going to be a fair amount of blasting on this 2.5-mile project on top of the pass. And so it would go from Pipestone Pass about 2.5 miles towards Butte. The one on the Jefferson County side, that road wasn't improved until the 1930s. All right, so this is just a cool road to drive. We all agree about that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I came over here that way this morning because I missed something when I was working on the National Register nomination. So then there was another snag. When the bidders put in on the project, they had to put in 2 bids for each potential contractor. One of them was on the federal wage rate, and the other one was on union scale. So there was actually 2 bids coming in from each contractor on this initial project over the divide, or on Harding Way. And so what side do you think they're gonna take? You know, the highway commission is pretty adamant, we have to accept the wage scale that the Fed set for us. While Silver Bow County is saying, no, it's gotta be the union scale. And so that delayed the letting of the project for several days because they argued about it. It appears pretty frequently in the highway commission records too, that they weren't gonna back down, but eventually they did back down. Because if they wanted to get the road built, they were gonna have to use union wage scale to get it done. The Butte Miner, however, was getting a little impatient with the fact that they hadn't let the project yet. And they wrote in one of the editorials, it said, quote, "A certain unmentionable place is said to be paved with good intentions. It begins to look as though they might be the kind of paving which the 18-mile hill project will be laid." So there was, you know, the delay was bad because they needed to put these guys to work and they wanted the road built fairly bad, or pretty badly. Finally came to an accord a couple days after the project was supposed to be let, and the contract was awarded to the Heisel Construction Company in Salt Lake City for just under $74,000. Now, you know, 2.5 miles would be at least $1 million a mile. So, I mean, that was a pretty cheap project, really, when you look back at it, even under accounting for inflation. Heisel was fairly active in Utah and in Idaho and in other parts of the country, but this was the only highway contract they ever got in Montana. Apparently they were kind of hard to work with for the highway commission and the resident engineer, and so there was no other Heisel projects built in Montana after this one. Work began on this a few days after, just 5 days after the project was let, and they took off. I mean, they worked hard. They were trying to get done as much as they could before winter shut down. They got most of it built before winter set in. They did build 20,000 linear feet of rustic log guardrail. Yep, I'm getting a little ahead of myself there. 12,000 linear feet of log guardrail on the road, 21 culverts, several rubble stone retaining walls, one of which is still up there and is in the process of failing. Just on the other side of the pass from here, you might have noticed it, which we're in the process of trying to find a way to get that done quickly, get it fixed before the road goes away. Also, they surfaced it with decomposed granite, which the Whitehall newspaper said it was just almost as smooth as a baby's bottom. But for how long that would last is a big question. They did work on the switchbacks that we have up there now. They did improve some of the curves, and so it was a major project, mostly built with Silver Bow County money. It officially opened to traffic on July 4th, 1922. But actually, Heisel didn't complete the project until the next spring. So what had happened was they built the road, and then the highway commissioners and the highway department people and the county commissioners took a look at it and said, we can't accept this just yet, because there was still rocks overhanging the road, and it was all in all, it was still a fairly dangerous situation up there after they got done. So here comes Harding Way. So he built this great road, goes through Thompson Park. The city and the county were going to make every use of that fact, that it provided access to Thompson Park. That it also was a scenic drive that was going to bring tourists to Butte, Sunday drivers mostly. But it's got to have a name, even though it's the Yellowstone Trail. Well, Montana in the 1920s, the state was crisscrossed by 13 named highways. And these are highways that provided access to national parks, tourist attractions, historic sites, that type of thing. And they all had real colorful names as well. Yellowstone Trail was one, Theodore Roosevelt International Highway. Anybody know that one still exists? Anybody know what that one is now? US Highway 2. Custer Battlefield Highway, provided access to the Custer Battlefield in Nebraska, and then on up to Glacier National Park. Buffalo Trail, which a lot of that followed the old Nez Perce Trail, and the Park to Park Highway. Just to name a few. One of my favorites is the Great White Way, which also came through Butte, I believe, and the Vigilante Trail, which went from Ennis, or West Yellowstone through Ennis, Virginia City, Twin Bridges, and up to Butte as well. So, and of course, what their symbol was, any idea? 3777. And that's one of my favorite roads. I've been doing some research on that one as well, but not finding a tremendous amount by it. All of these roads were marked by colorful signs, very distinctive, and like the Yellowstone Trail had a chrome yellow circle with an arrow in it telling you which way to go, or where there's a curve, or wherever else that you needed to watch out for. Again, this highway is a little bit more of a misnomer, because these roads were no better than the county roads that we have today. In fact, a lot of them were in worse shape than the county roads are today. The new road over Pipestone Pass was part of the Yellowstone Trail and part of the Vigilante Trail. So it was, so naming it seemed a little bit redundant to me. Oh, I forgot too, in 1923, the Ron McNally Auto Trails map calls it the Piper Stone Spur. So got it totally wrong. But that wasn't enough for the people in Butte. So civic leaders, some of the ACM executives, the county commissioners got together to try and hash out a name for this new highway that would make it appealing to people so that they would want to travel it. And so they came up with names like Clark Way, named after William A. Clark, the Ryan Road after J.D. Ryan, Daly Drive, we all know who Daly was, and Carroll's Causeway. I mean, it was never a causeway, but I think they were getting a little tired. They were even gonna name it after Marshal Foch from World War I, because he had just been to Butte to visit. They were gonna call it the Rue de la Foch. So, but finally they decided on Harding Way, and they could all live with that. They told President Harding about it, and he pronounced it good. He was a good roads advocate, but he never saw the road. He came to Butte before he died in 1923, but he never drove Harding Way, so he never saw it. But again, it was more than just a connection between Butte and Whitehall. It was also access to Thompson Park. And a lot is made about those scenic qualities that the road had in the early 1920s. There's a spot along it, even today, if you look quick, you can get a good view of Butte off to the side. I'm thinking when they're talking about scenic in regards to overviews of Butte, they're talking more about when you get to the bottom of the hill between 9 Mile and Harrison down in there. So, but you know, scenic is scenic, and that did bring a lot of people up there, and it did provide access to Thompson Park like they planned. 1923, a couple of plumbers named William McGill and Charles Nevin installed a fountain. So you all know about the fountain that's up there now, right? Which you can still see next to the road. It was right across the highway from where that fountain is.
There's two of them.
Two of them.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm getting to yeah, you're right. And they had bubblers for horses, dogs, and people. I have no idea what it looked like. I haven't seen a photo of it, and there wasn't a photo in the newspapers. But it was a big deal in any case. In 1927, though, the Butte Kiwanis Club built the existing fountain, concrete fountain that's there today. That's kind of got an interesting history in of itself. It was designed by an architect named Walter Arnold. He was a man I'd never heard of before until this. It was built by Kiwanians, and they just set the cement and left to go home, and vandals hit it. They kicked at it, and they put their heel prints in it, apparently they dumped a big boulder in the basin, and so it hadn't even been in use for, more than a few hours before it was vandalized. It did have a tablet on it. I've got some pictures of it in here too, we'll go through that. Tablet that said, "Greetings, thirsty wayfarer, Butte Kiwanis Club, 1927." And it had 2 bubblers, I believe, and I couldn't, of course you can't really see it now. There was some modifications that were done to it later on because the spring was fairly close to the highway and the road hadn't been paved yet, so they were getting a lot of dust in the water. So the spring that's there now, you can still hear it, up on the hillside behind it. They moved it back so the dust wouldn't be such a big issue with it. 1926, the road was, travel on the Harding Way increased as the number of automobiles increased on Montana's highways. People were buying cars like crazy during the 1920s, mainly because they were affordable, easy credit to get them, and easy to pay off. But highway traffic was really on the increase during the 20s, both commercial and tourist and passenger, regular traffic. And so as that happened, the demands on the road became a little bit tougher, became harder to maintain. The curves still didn't quite do the trick for a lot of drivers, especially commercial vehicles. 1926, the road was redesignated US Highway 10 South. There was a Highway 10 North and a Highway 10 South. Highway 10 North went through Helena. Highway 10 South went through Butte. And the Highway Commission about that time started planning for a new project. So in 1930, February 1930, they awarded a project to reconstruct the dangerous curves on Harding Way on the west side of the divide. And they awarded the project to Leo Lawler. Anybody heard of him? He's from Butte. So I think he died in the 40s, I believe.
What was his name? Leo what?
Leo Lawler, Lawler. But it was to build a project to a 24-foot paved surface, is what it is today. It hasn't changed since then. Lawler worked hard on it. He was hampered by Sunday drivers and wanted to go up and see how the road was coming along. That's an endemic problem with highway projects in Montana, sightseers. They had the same problem on Beartooth Highway. You could barely negotiate it with the car, but that didn't stop people from going up there anyway before it was completed. That same year in 1930, the Bureau of Public Roads awarded a project also to Lawler to reconstruct part of the highway that's on Forest Service land. The Bureau of Public Roads was responsible for projects on federally owned land, including national forests, and not so much reservations, but on BLM land, that type of thing. So they didn't work through the Highway Commission. They did their own design work. They let their own projects, but they used state money to build those projects. And so they let, I think their project was maybe 3 miles, just on the other side of the divide in Jefferson County. And then, of course, in 1932, a contractor named James Crick built the 14 miles of road on the Jefferson County side. So by 1933, there was a paved road over Pipestone Pass. Now, the pavement was something called road oil, and all that is a low-quality oil that's mixed with gravel and then placed. Remember, us older people remember playgrounds that were asphalt covered?
Oh, yeah.
Because we were tough then. You respected if you fall off the merry-go-round, you were gonna get hurt. That was fun. So, and that's what road oil pavement is like, that old pavement that they had on playgrounds that we remember when we were young. Also about that time, we can go do that now, in fact. There are, on top of the pass, some of you may know this, there are 7 areas where there are billboards that are painted on the sides of rocks next to the highway. They're a little hard to see now because you should be watching the road, not the side. Especially, when you're trying not to go off the road. Some of them were designed both for people on the highway and for passengers on the railroad. You can see them from both places. This particular one is for Loisel, am I pronouncing that right?
I think so.
Loisel's taxi service. Loisel had a taxi service in Butte from about 1921 up until his death in 1934. He died in a tragic auto accident in Nevada. But before that, this is where the connection to Frank Little comes in. That this is something I hadn't thought about in the past, that we should have thought about, is that when Little was kidnapped, the people who kidnapped him were driving a Cadillac, right? There couldn't have been too many Cadillacs in Butte in 1960. But one person who did own a Cadillac was Alex Loisel. And there was a gentleman that believes that Loisel was the man driving the Cadillac that Little was kidnapped in. So that could be true. I mean, I think, who killed Frank Little is going to be one of those enduring mysteries forever, actually. I don't think we'll ever really know the truth, but we might someday. It's also great when you're sitting and drinking beer with somebody and you don't have anything else to argue about. Who killed Frank Little? But there are a few spots up on the pass that advertise Loisel's taxi service. And so I think that makes those particular billboards and their possible connection to Frank Little all the more important. But there are other ones up there as well. Some of them you can't read anymore, but you can tell that there was something painted on them. This one, we can read Montana, but we don't know what it was advertising. We don't know who the sign painter was. There was 4 or 5 sign painters, I think, active in Butte at the time. But it's nothing in the papers about who did it, so there's really nothing conclusive about who may have painted these. There's another one for Monarch stoves, we think, that they sold in one of the hardware stores here in Butte at the time. It'd be about sometime between 1931 and 1933. La Preferencia cigars. You couldn't get away with advertising cigars anymore, but they were fairly popular in Butte at the time. And here's one of the retaining wall that's in the process of failing. Can you see why? The bottom of it's already dropped out, so they're working pretty hard to find a solution to that. And before you get mad about it or anything, I have been pushing them to put another rock one in there. So it looks like it does today. But whether they'll do it or not, I don't know. There is another sign up there for Sherman and Reed Livery and Undertaking. I think they were down on Arizona and Front Street, maybe somewhere down in that area.
They were a couple places, but yeah, they had one uptown and then one.
So they were trying to get you to crash.
Pardon?
So they were trying to get you to crash.
Yeah. It's kind of a nice combination of businesses, livery and undertaking. But, I've seen all over Montana, that seems to be hardware stores with an undertaking parlor on the second floor. So I always wondered what the people shopping there thought when they knew what was going on upstairs.
It's because the cabinet makers could make coffins.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a national thing. That's
Yeah. It's funny what you learn about Montana over the years,
Yeah.
the combinations of businesses around the state, especially during the Homestead era, in the 1910s, 1920s. Here's what the original design for the retaining walls looked like, and you can see the log guardrail up on top. They did everything they could during the design phase to really keep the road looking rustic. The log guardrails, the retaining walls, that type of thing, are really intended to keep the road kind of fitting into its environment so that it didn't, in those days, the roads really conformed to the environment, unlike the interstates, which made the environment conform to them. And so, yeah, I think they did a good job, I think, in the long run of trying to meld the surroundings to the highway project. Here's a copy of what the plans looked like in 1921. The plan sheets are really in poor condition now. They're on linens, all hand-drawn, and they're really works of art, you know, especially the old bridge plans. Or something I would like to hang on my wall, but my wife says no. So I'd hate to think what my place would look like if I wasn't married. But, anyway, this is just to give you an idea of what those plans look like. They're very basic. They give you the alignment. There'd be something in them that says, well, the road's gotta be this such and such wide. And it would really be up to the contractor and the resident engineer to decide where to put the guardrails and do some of the other detail work. So there's really not a whole lot on them now. Compared to highway plans now are extremely detailed. And in fact, they're doing them in 3D and the whole works before they actually build them. And this is another view of the switchback sections that are hard to read. I'm not an engineer, so I have a little difficulty still with some of the plans.
Impressively sporty.
Pardon?
Impressively sporty.
Mm-hmm. They're big. I mean, they're really nice.
It's got nothing more than it needs.
No, that's all. That's what the Beartooth Highway plans look like too. Warren G. Harding. I always wondered what happened when Harding was accused of all these different scandals when he was still in office. If they still were in favor of naming the road after him, but I didn't see anything about that. Just some of the postcards. These came out, I believe, in the 1930s, early 40s. Show what the road looked like. We all know these places because it hasn't changed. This is one of my favorite, a lot of photographs of this particular landscape feature. We all seen this, it's on this side of the pass, still there. The one on the photo on the left is what it looked like from the railroad tracks before they built it, before they built the highway. Just to kind of give you an idea, I think the road was raised up quite a bit, so there must have been quite a bit of cut work at the base of the rock, and then what it looked like in 1921 or 22 after it was completed there on the right. You know, it looks a little bit, the road looks a little bit different today, and I think some of that is from work that occurred in the 30s. Here it is again with the Vigilante Trail bus. The bus provided connections between Butte and Whitehall, Twin Bridges, and Virginia City and Ennis. And so this was really the high point of the Harding Way as far as the advertising photos. And then an Owen Smithers photograph that was taken and used by the highway department as advertising, the work that they did, and also to draw tourists to Montana. This was a particularly scenic route that they ought to travel to see things like this particular feature. Then, of course, what it looks like today. When I came down to do the first photography, photographic record, I was so excited to see that I almost got hit by a car. So even though I have my orange vest on, but I like the rock work there, the cut work there on the right. A lot of the road is bordered by that, and I think it really adds a lot of character to that highway as well. And then the fountain taken in, I'm not sure when this photo was taken. I would assume probably the 50s based on the dress the woman's wearing, 60s maybe. Showing a little too much leg for the 50s, I think. But just to give you an idea, there was also 2 years after the fountain was built, there was a local flower club that got permission from the county and from the highway commission to landscape around this particular fountain, but all that landscaping is disappeared. And then what it looks like today. I'd like to know the story of who hit that wall there. I mean, they must have been traveling pretty hard to knock that thing off like they did, or else it was a snowplow.
It might have been repeated.
Yeah, well, it looks like a pretty clean break. So.
I have my own repeated hits.
But again, just some historic photos of the road with the original guardrails. And the original, this would be from the 1920s with the original surfacing. You know, it's still kind of scary, you know, when you think about it with the cars back then. And then its association with the railroad. The tunnel is still there under the pass. You can still walk through that. I didn't do that, but I know people who do. And just other photos. I mean, it's kind of, in some ways, the photos look a lot like Beartooth Highway. Same type of features associated with both roads.
What year is that, Dave?
This one I'd say is probably early 30s.
Pretty barren.
Pretty barren, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know if that was because someone was, well, they must have been cutting timber, I don't know.
Might have been a landslide.
Kind of something. This one looks a little later. This is after it's been paved. And then that. It's running out of time, it looks like. And then the end of it. So I assume that on the left is where 9 Mile House was located.
9 Mile House was on the right-hand side.
Right-hand side? Where's that, where that little park is?
Yep.
Okay. And then I just included this because I do like highway features that aren't really associated with the highway department. This is over in Whitehall. I remember stopping here a lot when I was a kid because they had trout in the little moat around the base of the thing, and I was, so I stopped there the last time I went through. Looks quite a bit different than it did, 50 years ago. See, there's still trout in it. I sure felt sorry for him this time, though. And then I was always told, end your program with the dog.
Good advice.
So this is my dog. So with that, I've got a few minutes for questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.